It's chocolate truffle.
Ooh, yummy. Where did you get that?
Like many types of inventions, a lot of our favorite food dishes were created as happy little mishaps. From some of our favorite snacks to some of our most craved desserts, here's a list of 10 foods that were accidentally invented.
Give it to Mama.
Mama don't want this.
Thank you for the nachos, Nacho.
I'm about to eat nachos! It's the greatest moment of my life!
From happy hour appetizers to sporting events to even an intimate dinner party for two, or let's be real, possibly just one, nachos are a go-to dish for many occasions. Regardless of how you eat your nachos, you may not be aware that nachos were, in fact, an accidental creation. It all went down in 1943. The story begins with a group of American housewives who went for a shopping trip across the border to Mexico. On their way back to the U.S., the ladies stopped in at a restaurant, but unfortunately, the place was closing up for the night.
Are you a Mexican or a Mexicant?
However, luckily for the American shoppers, the maitre d' named Ignacio Nacho Anaya was so accommodating that he decided to whip up something using some basic ingredients in the kitchen. Using what was left over from the dinner service, Nacho heated the cheese with the chips and then added jalapeno peppers. And thus, the iconic and equally mouth-watering nachos were born. The genius that is the ice cream cone.
Ice cream is wonderful!
Ice cream and cones are such an iconic duo that it's difficult to imagine a time when one existed without the other. But yes, this Twilight Zone era did occur. Ice cream was already a popular summer treat for quite some time before the cone came into the picture. Our beloved ice cream was originally sold exclusively in dishes and cups. But then, one glorious day in 1904, an ice cream crisis struck at the St. Louis World Fair. A busy ice cream vendor ran out of dishes to serve the frozen treat to customers. Purely by chance, a nearby vendor was selling pastries that resembled waffles. Ernest Hamwee, the pastry vendor, chose to help the harried ice cream vendor out by folding his waffle pastries into a cone shape. They were an instant hit.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't they be? Everyone at the fair loved the ice cream served in a cone, and then after the fair, a demand grew for these tasty and convenient cone-shaped cup replacements. And so, naturally, as the popularity of ice cream itself rose, so did the popularity of the cone along with it. And we are ever so appreciative. Life is better in pink, even the lemonade.
Is this made from real lemons? Yes.
Ever wondered where pink lemonade gets its color from? Us too. There are actually two origin stories for the pink version, and both fall under the category of accidental inventions. Interestingly enough, both stories also randomly involve circus employees and are, well, not the most appetizing. The first version contends that a circus employee innocently used a bucket of water to make lemonade that a performer had unfortunately used to wash her pink stockings in. Yikes! The second story apparently involves some cinnamon candles accidentally being dropped into a batch of regular lemonade and turning it from yellow to a pinkish color. And there you have it. Be assured, though, that the pink lemonade you would drink today is most certainly made in a different manner. The pink lemonade we have now simply has some food coloring, or possibly some strawberries or raspberries added into the mix that turns the yellow drink to a refreshing pink color. The one, the only Slurpee.
One extra large Slurpee.
A Slurpee is an American institution all on its own. Just watch out for the brain freeze. Slurpees, as a brand, are only available at 7-Eleven stores. Well, thirsty kids everywhere owe a big thank you to a Dairy Queen franchise owner named Omar Nedlick. Nedlick's soda machine stopped working on a hot day at DQ, so he logically moved his soda into the freezer to keep it cold. However, it turned out that Omar accidentally left the soda in the freezer for too long. Oh no! But oh yes! At first, the DQ franchise owner thought he had caused a real problem because his sodas were nearly frozen. But instead of panicking, he decided to sell the partially frozen sodas to thirsty customers rather than offer them nothing.
Whoa, that's good squishy.
The customer feedback was all positive. They loved his partially frozen sodas. This surprise reaction inspired Omar Nedlik to design and construct a machine that essentially makes partially frozen sodas on purpose instead of by accident. Slurpees may have been accidentally invented at a Dairy Queen, but don't forget, you have to go to your nearest 7-Eleven now to get this popular frozen drink. Cheese Puffs, the dependable cheesy snack.
What the hell happened?
An explosion of flavor! I'm working some very unstable herbs!
Cheese is an exceptionally popular food on, well, just about everything. And cheese mixed with another treat is like the ultimate of ultimate snacking foods. Consider the cheese puff in all of its cheesy glory. Cheese puffs are one of those perfect snacks, just right for a party, a movie, or simple afternoon nosh session. These crunchy snacks are right up there with potato chips, tortilla chips, and popcorn on the top snack list of all time. Cheese puffs are made from puffed up corn and coated with a layer of cheese-flavored powder. However, did you ever wonder where cheese puffs came from? Well, it turns out cheese puff loyalists everywhere owe a man named Edward Wilson a debt of gratitude for coming up with this beloved snack back in the 1930s.
Cheese puffs.
As legend has it, Wilson worked at an animal feed factory, which means he was working with a lot of corn. One day, he saw fellow employees pouring corn kernels into a machine by hand because the machine was starting to get clogged, which resulted in the corn kernels blowing up into puffy ribbon shapes. This intrigued Edward. He saw an opportunity here, and so he brought the puffs home and experimented with different flavors until he eventually landed on cheese as the perfect flavor. And from the way these bad boys fly off the shelves at supermarkets, we'd say Edward Wilson was definitely onto something with cheese puffs. The petty beginnings of the potato chip.
Hey guys, look what I smuggled aboard.
Homer, no!
The potato chip story is kind of hilarious and equally petty because it seems like this brilliant snack was kind of almost made out of spite. We've all been there, you know, when you get a difficult, finicky, and very, very, very picky customer.
You know, I kind of have a headache. Maybe you should go home.
Well, now, think about all the different potato chip brands that exist. Dizzying, isn't it? When you really ponder the chip, though, you realize that this salty and crunchy snack is pretty basic. Some fried slices of potato and salt is the usual potato chip recipe, but within this basic framework are a seemingly infinite number of variations one can enjoy. The original snack chip dates back to 1853. Because the customer is always right, a chef named George Crumb had to keep making increasingly thinner sliced fried potatoes in a seemingly vain attempt to satisfy one particularly finicky patron. The exasperated Chef Crumb eventually sliced the potatoes to what he thought was a ridiculously thin degree. However, when he served the thin potatoes to the customer, he loved them. Word of these thin potatoes got out and quickly spread to other customers. And over 150 years later, we're still chowing down on this delicious snack on the regular. Thank goodness for chocolate chip cookies.
Put that cookie down! Now!
Chocolate chip cookies are loved far and wide by kids and adults alike who enjoy them with their milk or coffee at break time or perhaps recess time at school. The sweet cookie coupled with the even sweeter chocolate chips makes for a delectable classic that even Gordon Ramsay would have a hard time finding a flaw in. We're sure many bakers would probably like to take credit for dreaming up this recipe of perfection. However, serendipity actually takes the cake, or cookie in this case. One glorious day in 1938, a woman named Ruth Wakefield was baking, or well, trying to bake, chocolate cookies. But she ran out of baking chocolate and was at a loss for what to do next.
We were talking about chocolate?
That was 10 minutes ago.
Wakefield then decided to break up a semi-sweet chocolate bar and add the pieces to her cookie batter, unsure exactly of what the result would be from this improvisation. Instead of the added chocolate pieces making the intended chocolate cookies, the result was cookies with chocolate chips. Ruth Wakefield thought her cookies were a failure at first, but people absolutely absolutely loved her accidental innovation. Her contribution to the cookie world went down as one of the great success stories of all time, and one that we continue to enjoy today, and one invention that the Cookie Monster is particularly grateful for: the simplicity of the sandwich.
Max Club sandwich. And heads up, I lost a Band-Aid.
The sandwich is one of the most convenient foods possibly in existence. As irony would have it, it was actually created for this very purpose, but accidentally. The variations are almost endless and include hamburgers, ham and cheese, grilled cheese, peanut butter and jelly, and arguably even the hot dog on a bun. That's just a handful of the choices available, so it might be a little hard to imagine lunch without the sandwich. Remember, it isn't just the fillings that make a sandwich, but the bread as well, with rye, whole wheat, Kaiser rolls, sourdough, and the ever-classic white bread as possible choices. Like the other foods on this list, sandwiches did not always exist.
What? No way!
The sandwich was conceived in the 1700s by John Montagu, 4th Earl of Sandwich. The Earl was famous for his all-night gambling binges, and sometimes he couldn't even be bothered to eat a proper meal with a knife and fork. And so the story goes that Montagu instructed a servant to forget the silverware and bring him slices of meat stuffed between pieces of bread so that he could continue to eat as he played cards. Truly innovative. You see, the sandwich was a matter of convenience for the Earl of Sandwich, and this convenience is one of the reasons his invention is still with us to this day. The glorious apple tart tatin.
Like warm apple pie. Yeah? Yeah.
We all recognize an apple pie when we see one, or at least we tend to recognize the scent. Ah, smells like Grandma's cooking. However, there are variations on the apple pie that are a little less common, like the tarte tatin. This version of the beloved American favorite only has crust on the bottom and none on the top, as is the case with most apple pies. The tarte tatin also uses heavily caramelized apples for a uniquely sweet flavor, and we are so grateful for it. This fortuitous mistake took place in the 1800s when Stephanie Tatin accidentally overcooked the apples for the pie she was making.
A monkey could have made them.
Tatin put the crust over the apples to prevent them from continuing to bake in the oven. When Tatin served her pie, she flipped it over so the crust became a bottom crust. Mind officially blown. What's interesting is that Stephanie Tatin didn't flip the pie in a demonstration of culinary excellence, but rather she did it because she didn't want her guests to see the burn marks on the crust. Makes sense to us. Her guests loved the fresh and serendipitous take on the familiar apple pie, and so the tarte tatin became a part of culinary history. Totally OG tofu.
Didn't you know? Todd's vegan.
Hate it or love it, tofu has been around for more than a couple of thousand years. This soybean-based food may be known to be bland, but it is also definitely a viable meat replacement. Tofu can be seasoned with whatever flavors you like, and it can be added to dishes in place of meats like chicken, fish, and beef. Despite tofu's longevity, it is still not very popular with many meat lovers.
Nope.
To be fair, not only does tofu have little taste, it also can have a soft consistency similar to Jell-O that many people find unappetizing. The thing is, though, according to historical sources, tofu has been around in some form or another for the last 2,000 years. The origin stories of tofu are difficult to verify after so much time, but both of them lean into the theory that tofu was accidentally invented. In one version of the story, tofu was first made when a little bit of nigari, a bitter-tasting byproduct formed when salt is removed from seawater, accidentally found its way into a pot of milk and soybeans. The other story contends that soybeans were simply dropped into a pot of boiling water that contained sea salt. Neither story is more captivating over the other, but both demonstrate that even exceptionally helpful foods can be invented by accident. We're serving up more great videos. Just tap or click, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell to join our notification squad.